I've done that exact thing to students. I've devalued their position, which is the worst thing I've ever done as a teacher.
Yeah.
Is not try to meet the students where they are.
In the system that we have, we can't really expect students to be willing to fail, because there's really no incentive to be a risk taker. Failing has a natural benefit, but in the system of school, you can't really, it seems like, I think in fact, because school is life, you can benefit from failing, but it seems like failing is a bad thing, always. Welcome to the Unexamined Education. My name is Jonathan Ali, and as always, I'm joined by my friend Shaun Dalrymple. In our conversations, we draw upon our experience as educators to gain insight into the essence of teaching and learning. We hope that our discussions inspire and benefit you, whether you are a teacher, administrator, student, parent, or anyone else that understands the importance of education in the life of the human being.
Good morning, John.
Good morning, Shaun.
So, John, I wanted to ask you, why did you decide on English in college?
When I first started college full-time after I got out of the military, my initial choice wasn't English, it was nursing, because my brother was starting to be a nurse and my father was a registered nurse and also my stepmother. So we had a family of nurses, and it seemed like a very practical choice because they say that, you can easily find a job and the pay is pretty good. So I started with that as nursing as my major, but as I started attending classes that first semester, imagining that this is the path that I'm on, I found that I was not motivated to study. I wasn't interested in my classes. It wasn't intellectually stimulating to me. So I changed my major to English because I felt pretty sure that if I did that, I would become interested in what I was studying.
That's the thing that I wanted to kind of get at is with English, because I feel like we both kind of approached it the same way, is that it seemed like a subject area that was rich enough and also diverse enough that surely it could sustain interest for years. But it's also, I think, one of these majors that gets maybe a little bit maligned for how impractical it is, unless you're going to be an English teacher. For me, that calculation and that decision in the university was a good decision, because it for sure, like English over time, the English major, which is kind of a silly name for it, yields great riches through the study of literature.
Yeah, and I would say, just from another point of view, besides the content of the study and the subject matter itself, just the fact that I was able to choose something that I wanted to do, right, as opposed to the thing that I understood to be more practical, made me interested in even those same subjects that before, as a nursing major, I wasn't interested in. For example, as a nursing major, I had to take some biology classes. And as a nursing major, I felt like I had to take these classes because they were related to this thing that I chose out of practicality, right? But somehow, and it's very strange, like it's a psychological just subtlety, but as an English major, I felt like this person who was pursuing knowledge, right? Who was pursuing understanding of the world, which could also happen as a nursing major. I'm not saying it's, something particular to being an English major, but it was because it was what I wanted to do, what I was interested in and what I was curious about.
Right, and that probably explains why you went the philosophy route as well for a little while.
Yes.
The same kind of approach of you're pursuing knowledge in a way that is appropriate to how you can understand the world.
Right.
My decision to be an English major was an excellent decision, but it did take me years for me to really appreciate how much it had given me. That being said, it seems that my job when I'm an English teacher is to, at the very first meeting of of the students, is to ruin this subject and this course of study that I have found so rich.
Right. I think I know what you mean very clearly by ruining it for them, but can you give some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. Over the years, I bet I've had 100 students come up and say to me, I don't really want to analyze this text. I just enjoy the story.
Yeah.
And I feel like analyzing it ruins it. And they don't say exactly that way, but that's the sentiment. And it's clearly expressed, and it has been expressed by a number of students vocally. And I imagine there's plenty of silent students out there who just wish we would read a good story and be done with it. And I always find myself in the position, well, I shouldn't say I always, but early on in my teaching, I found myself in the position of defending this approach in high school to really analyze the text.
Yeah.
To really understand what's working in the text and how it's working. So I would give defenses like, well, I know that you think that you enjoy the story, but really, if you start analyzing this and unpacking it and seeing what's going on behind the plot, then that's when you will really enjoy the story.
Right.
I realized, unfortunately, after I'd done this song and dance for way too many students, I realized much later that what I was doing was I was telling them to skip over an important part of their growth in appreciating literature. In fact, if you tell a student, or if you don't allow a young person to go through a phase of just enjoying the stories, then you really don't have good odds on them ever appreciating anything deeper about literature.
Yeah. And actually, teachers find themselves in this situation, I think, as a rule, which is basically in a position of having an appreciation for something, some subject matter, some area of knowledge or some skills, and feeling this urgency or this need to convince your students that they should also care about this thing, that this is important, it's valuable to them. And it's really hard. It's like a sales pitch that you have to give. And it's really difficult to sell something to someone who they don't recognize their need for that thing or the value of it. And you're just trying to find some angle to where you can, quote unquote, hook them. And this is even part of teacher training to a large extent, is how to design a lesson to where you can establish that for the students. And that's good. Like that shows that awareness of how important that is, that the students, in order to engage in it and benefit in it, they have to see value in it. But like you're saying, it's not like the question is, can you just skip straight to that state, right? Like from a state of seeing little or no value in something, seeing it as a sort of waste of time, right? Like analyzing literature, that through, the teacher giving you a song and dance, that suddenly you'll be so convinced that you'll be able to engage in that in an authentic way.
I think we see this exemplified in pretty much every major course of study, where we ask the students to jump to this highly theoretical plane and enjoy everything from the ground up after we do this great theory.
Right. And it's so disappointing when you're faced with those. For example, if you have some piece of literature to read with the students and you make your case in the best way you can, that this is something that this is a really important work of literature and there's a lot to benefit from reading this and analyzing it. And then you see it just falls flat. Maybe there's one or two students who are excited, at that point. But for the rest of them, in my experience, even in the best circumstances, it remains just this sort of, okay, I guess this is something we have to do. Even though there are those cases where the students are excited about reading something, but that excitement about a story, right, about characters or some plot premise, it doesn't, like you're saying, I mean, we're just, sorry if I'm repeating the same thing, but it doesn't translate directly into interest in engaging in the analysis of literature.
Well, and this has been, and I kind of want to jump in with a little bit of a memory here, is that when you're talking, I'm thinking about, well, why wasn't literature ruined for me when I was growing up? It was typical back in the 90s when I was in high school to have the same approach. We got to uncover this. And I think the reason it wasn't ruined for me is, well, there were two things. One is that I had a teacher that I really respected who told the class one time in a very dismissive and rude way, Shakespeare is wasted on you guys.
Right.
And for me, that was the exact thing that needed to be said to preserve Shakespeare, put Shakespeare in a box and set him aside and realize that because I respected this teacher, I knew that I needed to deal with Shakespeare at another time. Yeah. I believed him. I took him at his word, is that what was happening here with trying to teach Shakespeare was we were missing out on a lot of understanding. And
but
then
you just weren't ready for it, that idea.
Right, I just wasn't ready for it. He was basically, that's exactly what he was saying. He was saying, you are not ready for Shakespeare. And so I think that allowed me to put Shakespeare sort of aside until much later. And then going into college, while I was pretty sure I was going to be a teacher already, I was not really sure what area of study. But the thing that got me through my first couple of years was some good books. And so it was just being able to do that part of education where I'm just reading books and enjoying books.
Yeah.
So I think it easily gets ruined for, that course of study gets ruined for a lot of students. And in the same way, other courses of study can get ruined for students.
So I could give an example from my own experience with math. The fact that I became an English major shows that I was mostly growing up interested in language and stories and writing. Those kinds of things really appealed to me, and I spent my personal free time working on those things. So the class that I enjoyed the most was English. The class that I felt the most frustration with was always my math classes. And it started with probably algebra or even maybe pre-algebra and lasted through geometry, and I took pre-calculus and took calculus as a senior in high school. And what I was always faced with was that the idea of math was really appealing to me. Like I always felt that it was this kind of pure conceptual space. And I really liked that. Even in calculus, although I didn't understand anything, barely anything that was going on, and I couldn't perform barely any of the operations, and I did terrible on the AP exam at the end of the year. Despite all of that, the idea of being in a calculus class and flipping through the pages of the calculus book, I felt really, it was very, appealing. I wished that I could understand calculus, and I wished that I could that I could do these operations and solve these problems. But then after high school, and this actually happened while I was in the military, I started taking some college classes, and I took a college algebra class, and, not to brag or anything, but I aced it. And I think at that point, it was like finally my chance to learn this thing and focus on this thing on my own terms, right?
Right.
And I was really able to enjoy it. It was like the only class I was taking because I was just going part-time. So I just signed up for one class for that semester, and I really focused on it, and I really wanted to learn it and master it. And even to the extent that it was either after that class, my memory is not too clear on this now, or before I took that class, I bought a college algebra textbook from a used bookstore, and I would go through the lessons and the units on my own and do the problems and everything, and I really enjoyed it. Like, it was really rewarding. It's just amazing to me that same content and material that was the bane of my existence in high school, because I knew there was a quiz coming, there was a test coming, I didn't feel like doing the homework. It was just this, this pressure to engage in this thing, and I couldn't take the time to try to really understand it or to try to really enjoy what I thought was appealing about it. I couldn't, right? But then once I had the opportunity to do that, it happened. Now, I didn't go that far in college mathematics because I was an English major. But even now, like, I'm currently watching some YouTube videos presented by this mathematician, and they're really interesting. And I wish I had more time to pursue that.
It's normal and expected for someone who gets out of the household, gets independent for a couple of years, for the real drive to try to step into education on his own terms. I think that's expected. And unfortunately, the way things are designed now, for most students, like their first opportunity to do that is like right when they're about to get out of college.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I've often thought that if I had gone straight to college out of high school, this couldn't have happened for me.
Right.
It would have just been a continuation of that same pressure, same expectation, same state of mind that I was in about going to class, that I need to succeed on the test and on the homework and everything like that. Right. It was because I was in this moment in my life where no one was expecting me to do it, right? No one cared whether I went and signed up for a college algebra class or not, because I was working full time, doing something that kind of just comes with a certain amount of societal recognition of its value, right?
Right.
So I could have just focused completely on that and just done that job. So this was like this thing that was mine, right? It belonged to me. It was something that I was deciding to do. And most of the people around me weren't doing anything like that. In fact, they thought I was weird for having a college algebra book, even though I wasn't in a class. And then it wasn't weird to go and take college classes, but it was still strange amongst, my peers to enjoy them or to, get some kind of intellectual enjoyment out of them.
Right, because for most people, and this, I would say that the wrong conclusion would be to say that you're unique. You're a unique individual for enjoying it. I think the conclusion I draw from this is that the expectation, not to say you're not unique, John.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate
that. You're a unique and wonderful person, but the societal expectation, or not societal, but what education had done to your peers, was to make them think isn't it great that we don't have to do this?
Exactly, yeah. And I've experienced this, in other situations too. I don't want to get into the story of this, but when I was studying in the Islamic seminary, and everyone there is apparently there because of a deep internal motivation, and none of them are being forced to be there. It's all a choice of everyone, and studying that subject that would be most meaningful to them. But I saw the exactly the same thing there is, being happy when class is canceled, trying to avoid tests, avoiding studying, all the same habits that you see. I think that, and the conclusion that I've always come to is these habits are created by the education, by school. Basically, they're created by school.
I have to tell a story about a student of mine who was a fascinating young man who, for whatever reason, he started sharing all of this information with me about lizards and snakes, and he was really into lizards and snakes. And he was like a sophomore in high school at the time. And he said that what he wanted to do with his life was be a herpetologist, which was a term I wasn't aware of, but I now realize that it's lizards and snakes. It's the logos of lizards and snakes.
Right.
So I asked him, how are you doing in biology? This is a natural but stupid question to ask, but I asked it anyway. Well, or I said something like that, or you must love biology. I framed it in some way. And the reason this really sticks with me, this young man said, no, I'm doing terrible in biology.
Right.
And I'm, again, I was at the age where I didn't value enough what he was doing, and I sort of directed him. I'm like, well, you need to probably really buckle down in biology if you think you're going to be a herpetologist there, young man.
Right.
And who knows? I need to try to track him down to find out what's happened to him, because it's been plenty of time that we should have a sense of where he ended up. But the problem that I see in school now, reflecting on that, is there's a kid who was so into snakes and lizards that it was coming out in English class, and he could not stop discussing these things and all these interesting facts about these animals. And honestly, I didn't have a high degree of interest in the facts that he was sharing. I, of course, have a great interest in his own plight as a human being.
Right.
But we have to let things like that carry someone as far as possible, because when you want to start talking about mitosis, you want to make darn sure that if you're trying to actually get somebody who's a trained, educated herpetologist who has the biology background, you got to make sure that they've gotten down to the, say, mitosis level. That's the thing I'm focusing on for some reason. You got to make sure they got down to the mitosis level through a genuine interest all the way, especially when you're dealing with young adults, where interest is the primary motivating factor for any true study. When you get older, you can realize that you can take these steps into this theoretical land, realizing that it's going to help you in your profession. But that takes a heck of a lot of maturity.
Right. But even just, I would say that for human beings in general, even, let's say, a mature adult who can buckle down and study some subject matter, master something that they don't really have an innate interest in, because they know this is important for some other thing that they're trying to achieve, even that person, the difference between the kind of learning that they're going to do in that situation and the kind of learning that they would do if they were motivated by curiosity or genuine interest are worlds apart, right?
Yeah.
The way that you can learn things through genuine interest it's almost like it's not right to call that and the other thing also learning, because they're so different in that way. And I agree, this student, the example of the student that you explained, it's not like you're saying he shouldn't be introduced to biology or he shouldn't be put in a biology class. I think the issue is that if you see that this expectation that biology should be something that also interests him, something that he also excels at and succeeds at, if you see that that's not happening, the important thing is to help him preserve that love that he has for herpetology and not push biology at the expense of that, or not that wouldn't be a casualty of this expectation of taking biology and being interested in biology. He should just know it's something that's there, and so that if he gets to the point where he could engage in it at that level of interest, then it wouldn't be his own ignorance standing in the way of that. Right. So, yeah, I don't know what that looks like, in practical terms in a school, but it might just look like a very, brief introduction to some topic without going into a lot of detail about it, for example.
Let's suppose that a school is interested in the student actually learning biology, right?
Yeah.
If a student is failing in biology, okay, you want to obviously look at ways for the student to improve. But if you have a student who's already interested in something that's clearly biological,
right,
then you've got this tremendous foothold to, and what's the risk? He's failing already. Why not just see what happens if you say, you know what, just study the lizards of Texas for the next 6 weeks and tell me give me a report, everything that's interesting about it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
What's the risk?
Yeah. Yeah, it might make you look at your biology course and wonder what's wrong with this course, that someone who clearly has an inclination and affinity for topics related to it is not succeeding in it, right?
Yeah.
Exactly like if you as an English teacher, if you have students who come to your class and they're clearly interested in stories, they get excited by stories, and you know that these stories contain all of the literary components that make it great literature, but they just don't want to sit and analyze them, right?
Right.
Then it should make us question, why are we pushing that then? Why don't we just allow them to read it, meet them where they are, rather than devalue where they are in this attempt to push them towards our expectation of where they should be.
Right. And the number of times, and I feel like the last few minutes I'm sort of harping on this thing about biology. It's not about biology. I've done that exact thing to students. I've devalued their position, which is the worst thing I've ever done as a teacher.
Yeah.
Is not try to meet the students where they are.
Right.
And just get frustrated that they're not there. They're like, I can't believe you're 16 and you're having trouble reading whatever text is, presented in front of you. Well, hell, that's not going to get them anywhere for me to just show grave disappointment.
Right.
Tests, grades, and assessments. I think there's a lot of value in assessing. I'll say this at the front end of it. There's a lot of value in it. It gives feedback. You can say, we tried to go over this stuff in class. Did you learn it? And I'm seeing evidence here that you did or did not learn it. But of course, that's not what the conversation is hardly ever. The conversation is, here's a test. You have to get a high grade for you to be considered a good student. Did you get a high grade? Yes or no? And it's been simplified, and students are routinely dehumanized through this procedure.
Yeah.
And if you want to know the one thing that I think, for all the things in education that can be improved, one thing we have to look at is this overvaluing of a number and how we're associating it with a student's effort, potential, and accomplishments.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'll give you another example that's related to that. Is a lot of the time that I spent as an English teacher in high school was preparing students for an AP, language and composition exam.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty intense exam. And one of the things, or about half of the exam or more, and I don't know in terms of scoring it, I don't remember, is they have to write 3 timed essays. And there are 3 different types of timed essays. It was 3, right?
Yeah,
I forgot.
It was 3.
Yeah. And so now there was a scoring rubric and, a system of scoring between 1 and 9. Correct me if any of these facts are wrong, because it's been a long time.
But by my memory, you've got it right for the early aughts.
Right. So at that time, this was the format of the test. And so, we had to write a lot of essays in order to try to improve their skills. But one thing now when I look back on it, I wanted, as many of my students to write well. And there was real quality difference between the essays that would receive 7, 8s, and 9s, particularly 8s and 9s, that when you read those examples that the College Board provides, you see that these are really good writers, right? And these are quality essays.
Yeah.
And I always felt like that most of the students couldn't get their because, and this is well known, this wasn't just my insight, but because the writing is too formulaic, right? They weren't willing to take risks. But I could see the dilemma that a lot of these students faced. A lot of them who I felt like had the potential to write like that is because they didn't want to take any risks. Because
right. You're saying they're writing, the students who couldn't reach that level, they were being too formulaic.
Yeah, the students who couldn't reach that level were being too formulaic, because what you would see is these highest scoring essays were not formulaic. They were pretty inspired, pretty creative, insightful, right? Now, so what I saw with a lot of my students who were AP students, they're very concerned about their grades, concerned about their GPA. Probably the expectation of their parents is that they bring home good grades. And there's just a real lack of willingness to take risks and to fail. And the thing about improving in your writing is, I guess, really, it's just the whole thing is against them in the first place, because the fact that there's this timed exam, and you only get one shot at it. Right. That already discourages you from having a risk-taking mentality. So I really think that the ones who scored high, they were just like the naturally gifted writers mostly. But I don't think it had to be that way. I think a lot more students, a lot more, teenagers have the potential of writing like that. But to improve like that, you have to take it on as your own and be willing to risk and not worry about what grade you're going to get and those kinds of things. You have to be willing to fail, basically. And in the system that we have, we can't really expect students to be willing to fail, because there's really no incentive to be a risk taker. Failing has a natural benefit, but in the system of school, you can't really, it seems like, I think in fact, because school is life, you can, benefit from failing, but it seems like failing is a bad thing always.
Right. I'm sitting there thinking about like what in a child's curriculum or child's educational experience teaches anything about failure. And it's the things that jump to mind to me are things like recess and gym class. And it's like these like physical things.
Yeah.
If you're playing a game of dodgeball or something, right?
Yeah.
And you get hit by the ball and you're out. That's just like, that's part of it and there's no real hard feelings about that over time. And we see students really enjoy games like that.
Yeah.
But we don't seem to ever want to translate that kind of ability to take a hit, to be out, and to just come right back. I don't feel like we're doing much to encourage that in the academics.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think it's because of quantifying failures, right? And instead of even just calling it a failure, right? Like
right. If the PE coach was keeping stats on how many times this kid's been hit out, and he reports it at the end, and he says, "And your grade, child, now because you were out so many times, is 50."
Yeah,
that would be ridiculous.
Yeah. A theory just occurred to me. I guess this would have to be thought, examined more deeply. But it's maybe when when the greatest expectation is just participation, which I think in PE and things like that is the case. Right. In that case, then a person actually has the ability to experiment and experience it. But when the expectation is not just participation, but it's a certain level of achievement that's defined, in a very specific and narrow way, then there's no freedom there, right? You just have to do what's going to get you that success. You just have to identify what does success look like here, and then you just try to replicate that. It's formulaic again. Like it's the student, the stereotypical student who is concerned about grades, just want to know, what do I need to do to get an A, right? And I had these students too. They would say, what do I need to do to get a 9 on this essay?
Right. Yeah.
And I would say, it's not. There's no formula for it. You have to be, inspired. That's what you have to do.
You get these honest kids. Yeah. At least they're not presenting any facade about why they're there.
Right.
It's just like, they've decided to just cut through all of it and
right.
Where's the 9? Where's the A?
Yeah. Right.
Show me the checklist.
Exactly. And then you can't, if you're the type of teacher who you want to inspire the students, you want them to do things because they feel interested in it and inspired by it. That's like the worst thing a student can come and ask you. Like if you, I had experiences where I would present something and try to do it in a way where the students themselves would realize the interest they have in it. And then afterwards a student come up and say, okay, I understood everything you said, but what do I have to do to get an A?
Right. You were trying to prompt like a true, genuine inquiry into something. And they come up and say, what do I need to do to get an A? Well, have a genuine inquiry and study.
Right.
So, yeah.
And then they're really confused after if you say something like
that.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And it's disheartening. It can be disheartening as a teacher because, you're dealing with so many things that have gone off the rails or actually you're the thing that's off the rails for the student.
Yeah, right.
And then you as a teacher, you're like, God, so many other things have gone wrong for this. And it's a terribly confusing situation.
Yeah.
And best of luck to any teacher going through anything like this.
Yes.
I want to clarify, teachers, you're not dehumanizing the kids by giving them grades. That's the system. That's the way the grades are reported back and forth. That's not anything but the product of us moving grades back and forth and making that a factor in how we decide what a student can do.
Right.
But you can be a part of making that easier on the kid. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, of course, our purpose here isn't to make teachers feel bad about what they're doing in class and things like that, but it's just for us all to reflect on the role that we play in this overall system and reflect on that in an honest way, right? Not sort of become a supporter of it just because we're part of it, but be critical members of that and see what role we can, what can we do in our classrooms that will at least ease a bit of that negative pressure with the students and then also amongst one another. Yeah, it can be, that's the risk of talking about these things really, is because the more you focus on them, the more you can start to feel a little hopeless about it. But at the same time, if you don't focus on it at all, then you also might as well be hopeless, right? Because you're just performing the job mindlessly.
Well, yeah, and you see that. I mean, you definitely see that sometimes. And I mean, I've certainly had years where I've kind of turned off my higher level conscious states of mind during the school day because I needed to get through the job.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I recognize that, and I know you recognize that. So although it's easy for us on our podcast to discuss these things as if, we can laugh about them and point out how wrong-headed they are. But at the same time, teachers are people who go to work and they do a job that's an important job, and that shouldn't be forgotten, just because of these different problems in the system.
Yeah. So I think we've done enough letting teachers know that they're good people. Now change some damn things.
Yes.
Come on. This is crazy. If you want critical thinkers, be a critical thinker.
Right.
Yes. But it is tough. It's a tough job. And I have nothing but respect for the teachers.
Yeah. All right, Shaun. Well, I think some conclusions we can come to based on our conversation, some insights that we can gain from this are, one, the importance of genuine interest in learning, and that the curriculum and the educational expectations in a course or a school should never be put at odds with genuine interest, because if you crush that genuine interest, then you basically crush the potential for real learning. And also the need as teachers, when we have students who aren't exactly where we would like them to be in terms of their level of engagement with the subject matter, to not react to that with frustration or disappointment or a sense of urgency, but rather to just meet them where they are. It's helpful to think of students as on a path that they've chosen themselves. And it's a natural path. It's something that all human beings do, is they go on this path of learning. And when we meet them in the classroom, they've already been on this path for some time and going in a certain direction with their own motivations and interests and curiosity and needs. So our job as educators, our job as teachers, is to see where they are on their path and help them on their path, rather than putting them on some different course that we think is better for them, which is far removed from the path that they've already chosen.
Yeah, I really like that, Jon.
Thank you to our listeners, and thanks to you, Shaun, for joining me for another great conversation, and we look forward to the next one.
All right, thanks, Jon.